The day is January 5th, 2012. At an undisclosed off-site location, Dr. Bannon leaves home and begins his commute to work. While in the car, he plays a video on his phone of his 12-year-old's birthday party from the previous night. The sight of it makes him smile. He would need that smile, he thought, as today was not like any other. Today was different. He had been anxious about the coming day for several weeks now, ever since the near-unanimous vote by the O5 Council that the containment chamber of SCP-106 was to be reopened. The opportunity was too great to be wasted, they said. The research that could be gained too tempting. Studying SCP-106's molecular makeup, its unique ability to open a pocket dimension, or even just the black sludge-like substance that appeared whenever the subject traveled through solid objects, was far too valuable to science to be outweighed by its potential for danger. He pleaded with them, begged them. But as Dr. Bannon and his team of 7 researchers and accompaniment of 40 security personnel began applying their protective equipment, he couldn't help but think that he could have done more to stop this. Only God knew how hard he had tried to make them see reason. He had seen what had happened in previous containment breaches at the facility. He had seen what had done to the poor members of the SCP staff that became its victims. Fates worse than death. Limbs, a mangled mess of melted fused skin. Faces sunken and hollow with eyes and tongues burned out. He shuddered to think of what would happen if containment failed again this time. But despite his misgivings, he knew full well that regardless of his participation, this research mission would go on with or without him. And no one knew as much about containing SCP-106 than he did. Slowly, they proceeded to dismantle each of the containment facility's outer barriers. 16 separate circular chambers surrounded SCP-106's inner containment facility, each filled with a variety of different fluids. Fluids in each chamber varied in consistency and viscosity from ionized water to ammonia to kerosene. SCP-106 had the peculiar ability to be able to change its molecular makeup, to meld with objects and phase through solid forms like walls and doors. It could literally melt into the space between walls. This made containing SCP-106 almost impossible by conventional methods. Liquids confused the creature enough to slow him down, in theory anyways. The secondary containment chambers were a recent addition to the facility since the breach incident 3 years ago. Dr. Bannon had been a new addition to the research staff then. He had joined the team with bright eyes and a desire to use their research to help society. Little did he know he would instead do everything in his power to keep whatever they found from ever leaving the facility. Back then, a breach in the containment of SCP-106 led to countless deaths of SCP personnel when a researcher working on the top floor of the outer layer of the containment facility, unknowing of the danger they were in, brought his child to work one day. It was thought that the outer layers of the facility were enough to be considered a safe zone from the inner vault that was SCP-106's containment. But it wasn't enough to stop the old man. SCP-106 preferred human prey between the ages of 10 and 25, and the sound of a child's cry or yell was enough to capture its immediate attention. What preceded was unimaginable horror. But despite the unfortunate events of the previous breach, the expedition continued their descent into the bowels of the building. After several hours of draining individual fluid chambers one by one and inputting complex codes and biometric scans from simultaneous top security clearance personnel at a time, the expedition team had eventually reached the lower levels of SCP-106's containment facility. Suspended in midair by ELO-IID electromagnetic supports, in the center of a vast subterranean chamber was a massive lead-lined steel cube, 40 layers thick, each layer separated by 36 centimeters of empty space, with support struts between layers randomly spaced to confuse SCP-106 from being able to phase through one layer to the next. Surrounding the cube on every surface were military-grade automated light systems capable of 80,000 lumens apiece, spaced every 2 feet around the perimeter of the inner containment chamber. The team felt their resolve chip away the closer they got to the suspended creature. Dr. Bannon motioned to overhead surveillance cameras above the cube and waited. Slowly, the cube was lowered to the ground until it hit the floor with a soft thud that lightly rumbled the ground above the expedition team's feet. With a resentful look at the red dot on the camera above, Dr. Bannon initiated the release protocol. All 7 researchers inputted their key cards and submitted themselves to retina scans as the 40 security personnel established defensive positions on every side of the lead-lined cube. For a moment, everyone held their breath in silence. You could almost feel the thumping of everyone's nervous heartbeats as they looked on to Dr. Bannon as he pulled out his key card. Everyone knew that as soon as it was scanned, the barrier between them and the old man would no longer exist. If the rest of the personnel could see Bannon's hand shaking as he gripped the key card tightly between his fingers, it would cause a possible mass panic among the whole team. As the spearheading researcher on the job that day, Bannon knew what he was up against, just the same as everyone else, if not more. He knew he couldn't show the fear that was pulsing through his veins. This wasn't his first rodeo here at the Foundation. He took a moment to collect his thoughts. "Get a hold of yourself, Bannon," he thought. Dr. Bannon took a deep breath and scanned the card. The door slowly opened. Armed with powerful rifle-length flashlights, the researchers cautiously waded into the dark entrance of the large cube. Inside the structure, they found a cell with a solid steel door. Signs of corrosion could be seen on the door's handle and from the outer walls of the cell, rust and rotted iron, but no breaches in the integrity of the cell. There were no more security codes at this door. It was a simple, round metal turn lock. Dr. Bannon swallowed and began to turn the handle open. The sound of metal echoed through the chamber as the door creaked open. Each of the researchers immediately pointed their flashlights into the room. There in the corner, standing motionless and undisturbed, stood SCP-106, the old man. He stood with eyes closed, locked in a dormant state. The researchers had planned for this. SCP-106 spent up to 3 months at a time in this subdued state, in between periods of otherwise agitation, where it would lash out at its containment and attempt to breach. The research team wasted no time. They began to collect data on the creature's biological makeup, taking whatever samples they could from the walls and floors, and recording photo and video of the specimen, while collecting any method of conventional analysis they could manage under the given circumstances. Dr. Bannon kept an eye on the old man's face the entire time, refusing to look away for 1 second for fear of it waking in the absence of his gaze. But to his relief, the creature did not stir, and the data collection process went smoothly. In a short period of time, the team had packed their gear and proceeded to carefully retreat from the inner chamber of the cube, making sure to keep their lights pointed at the creature the entire time. Once the team exited the steel-lined cube, they motioned again to the camera, and the huge, heavy doors of the cube closed back in on itself. The electromagnetic supports came back online, and the cube was suspended once again in 3-dimensional space, without any immediate contact with solid surfaces. The security detail began packing up their positions as everyone seemed to take a collective sigh of relief. That's when Dr. Bannon noticed the security camera. The red dot on the device had stopped blinking. The camera was off. A sudden feeling of dread entered Dr. Bannon's stomach as he turned in time to see all the cameras around the room turning off. Before he could react, the chamber was plunged into darkness as the electricity left the room. In the immediate darkness came a deafening bang followed by a gust of wind and the weight of a force strong enough to shake the ground and knock the researchers off their feet. The power of the electromagnetic supports were down. The cube had fallen. Dr. Bannon shouted to his team to immediately exit the facility. He reached for his flashlight in the darkness. He could hear screams in the background, gunfire. He managed to illuminate the space in front of him and saw his molecular biologist, Dr. Burns, scrambling to get her gear back up over her shoulder. "Leave it!" Dr. Bannon cried, only to see a hand emerge from beneath her and pull her down into a black viscous substance that swallowed her whole and then vanished into solid concrete. After hearing the cries to his left, he swung his flashlight just in time to see him. The old man had its hand on the chest of a security personnel and entered him, exiting through the other side, leaving a gaping hole in between. Bullets were useless, as they seemed to get trapped on entry of his body, slowly melting into his skin. SCP-106 then vanished into the floor and appeared behind another member of the security detail, grabbing him by the heel and dragging him as he pleaded and reached out to Dr. Bannon for help, pulling him halfway into the wall, and then letting go as the creature melted into the space between the walls, leaving behind half the poor man's body bleeding and still squirming to get away. One by one, he could hear his researchers crying out for help before their voices were extinguished. Before he could think of what to do next, the power came back on, and lights flooded into the large room. He gazed at the creature as it stood momentarily stunned by the influx of light. The old man had gaunt, piercing, hollow eyes and a face covered in dark, melting skin, and a lipless mouth that displayed terrible, decaying teeth. Its corrosive hand had a grasp on the arm of Dr. Breyer, the physicist, burning the skin beneath its grip as he cried out in pain. And then, without warning, the creature placed a hand on the wall of the metal cube and disappeared into it, pulling the doctor in with him, into the pocket dimension between the walls. 48 hours later in Containment Site-19, located in the state of Data Expunged, SCP personnel open the door to an observation chamber where SCP-049 is led in wearing steel-covered hand restraints. On the other side of a glass panel, Dr. Blake sat impatiently, watching the humanoid creature known as SCP-049 the Plague Doctor take a seat and face his direction. Dr. Blake hesitated to address the entity that sat in front of him, but putting aside his reservations, he spoke into the microphone. Blake informed SCP-049 of the recent breach that had transpired at the SCP-106 containment site. The doctor seemed intrigued at the news, and when asked if he would provide assistance, the doctor agreed. SCP-049 had exhibited abilities to produce instances of SCP-049-2, reanimated corpses that he alone had the ability to control by will. In the past, the Plague Doctor had been allowed certain privileges, deceased subjects for the Doctor to experiment on, in his quest to finally cure for what he referred to as the Pestilence, though none of the researchers could pinpoint exactly what the symptoms of this perceived illness was, or any specifics about it at all. However, the supply of subjects was halted after an incident where SCP-049 struck a personnel member, killing him instantly with his Touch of Death, an ability that ceases all bodily function upon contact. Since then, the Plague Doctor refused to cooperate unless he was provided with live subjects for experimentation. Up to this point, he had been denied, but Dr. Blake needed the Plague Doctor's help, and time was not on his side. Dr. Blake agreed to provide SCP-049 with several live D-Class personnel in return for his assistance. As we've come to learn time and time again here on SCP Explained, the Foundation has no qualms about ridding the lives of these ex-death row inmates. D-Class are essentially the Foundation's lab rats, and treating them as such is more than worth it if dealing with an SCP-106 containment breach. Bring in the orange jumpsuits. Splendid, remarked 049. The Plague Doctor was taken to the secret site of SCP-106's containment facility and briefed on the old man's ability to meld and travel between walls, floors, and solid surfaces, as well as its ability to pull objects into its own pocket dimension, of which there was little information about. SCP-049 grew more and more intrigued by the description of the old man. Upon arriving, a laboratory was prepared at the site for SCP-049. For proxies to serve as lures to bait SCP-106, the team procured the bodies of a recent public transportation bus wreckage that had left 12 younger adults dead. As the Plague Doctor began his surgeries on them, Dr. Bannon could think only of the prior containment breach. The staff suffered many casualties to personnel, and ever since then, anyone under the age of 30 were barred entry within 20 miles of the containment site. Just as Dr. Bannon began to rub his temple to think about how they managed to return SCP-106 to his cell that day, there was a yell of excitement. "Marvelous!" cried out SCP-049. The Plague Doctor informed SCP staff that he had finished his work, and the surgeries had been of paramount success. The Doctor had indeed produced 12 instances of SCP-049-2 as predicted. The subjects were horrid abominations, some with inverted faces and others with added appendages and gaping holes where limbs should be. But they were ambient, and the research staff would soon learn if they would be enough to lure SCP-106 back into containment. Staring at the dimly lit white room crowded with malformed ambient corpses, Dr. Bannon couldn't help but feel a sense of dread fill the pit of his stomach. But there was no time to second guess. With rifles and flashlights in hand, the team led the troop of SCP-049-2s out and down the concrete hallways and into a large freight elevator that led down to the vast chamber that housed the inner containment cube that was SCP-106's home since arriving at the facility. The drone-like Dash-2s did not speak during this trip. They did not blink. They simply stared straight ahead and acted at the behest of the Plague Doctor without any verbal input. The macabre parade arrived at the entrance of the cube and proceeded inside. Dr. Bannon informed SCP-049 that the Dash-2s needed to make noises of some kind, to cry out if they could. Anything would work, as long as it was audible enough. The Plague Doctor nodded his head, and all 12 of the reanimated corpses began to scream in terrifying unison. In the hollow distance, a roar was heard in response. It dripped from the ceiling. First a drop, then many more until a puddle formed on the ground in front of the cube. The Plague Doctor approaching with intrigue. Out of the floor rose up the creature known as SCP-106, coming face to face with the Plague Doctor. Upon seeing the creature, SCP-049 was ecstatic. He began to examine SCP-106 closely without fear of bodily harm. With lightning speed, he produced a vial and pincers from a medicine bag of black leather he kept under his robes and snatched a sample of the creature's black viscous skin. The Plague Doctor was overjoyed.
"This will lead to my greatest work and the cure for the pestilence once and for all."
But the old man did not seem to acknowledge or even enjoy the presence of SCP-049 and reacted violently, lashing out to strike the Plague Doctor. Sensing danger, 049 jumped back and willed the 049-2s to attack the creature. But before they could reach it, SCP-106 melted into a pool of black and disappeared into the floor. The instances looked around dazed. Another black pool appeared under one of them, causing it to fall into the portal and then out from the ceiling elsewhere in the vast stadium-sized room. Another pool opened up under one of the ambient thralls, sucking it down into the black abyss. And then another and another, and soon loud thuds could be heard echoing through the chamber as bodies began to appear from the top of the 100-foot ceiling, falling to a splatter on the concrete floor below. Upon witnessing SCP-106's abilities firsthand, SCP-049 nodded to Dr. Bannon as he swiftly packed up his medicine bag and made for the door, only to be blocked by SCP-106's materializing form. The Plague Doctor grew angry and struck the neck of the old man with his cold touch of death, but it seemed to have no effect on SCP-106. The black substance on his body started to creep over 049's hand, sizzling and searing skin and flesh as it went up the forearm. Sensing danger, the Plague Doctor pulled out a large scalpel and in one quick motion, sliced off his own arm at the elbow. The severed limb fell to the floor engulfed by the black bubbling substance. SCP-106 then lunged at the Doctor, whose quick agility allowed him to dodge and make for the doorway. Once in the hall, SCP-049 quickly pulled out a roll of brown gauze from his medical bag and began to wrap his bleeding wound tight as he hurried through the dimly lit corridor, lights flickering on and off. As SCP-049 turned a corner, a black substance appeared on the wall in front of him, and a chair came flying out of it towards his head. The Doctor dodged it, but did not dodge a sharp metal spike that materialized from another hole appearing on the wall to his left. It pierced the outside of his knee, causing his movement to be slowed. Hearing the sound of clanking metal, the Doctor looked up in time to see a desk falling out of another dimensional portal above him. He managed to roll sideways, missing the blow but straight into another one of SCP-016's portals, causing the Doctor to fall through the wall and into the floor of the room below. With a falling crash, the Doctor landed in the lower room and looked around quickly, seeking to regain his footing. The old man was nowhere to be seen, but he could hear him bumping in the darkness, traveling through the walls of the building. The Plague Doctor quickly analyzed the office room for something useful. On the wall, he found a map of the facility and studied the schematics. On the floor was a dead body. He crouched down close to it and stabbed it with a syringe from his cloak, animating the corpse and commanding it to run, serving as a distraction to lead SCP-106 away so he could make it to the adjoining hallway just a few hundred feet away. That was the armory. Limping from his injured leg, the Plague Doctor waited for the old man to be led away as he made it to the room. He began tearing through the weaponry that lined and leaned up against the walls in every direction, ignoring the automatic rifles as they were useless. There he found what he had been searching for: flash grenades. As the form of another black portal began to materialize in front of him, He pulled the pin and tossed the grenade in that putrid puddle. A blast of light erupted from within, followed by the sound of the creature recoiling in pain. The Plague Doctor pulled another pin, and another, and in this manner, he led SCP-106 toward the secondary containment facilities that had begun filling with fluid. When he reached a level where he could recognize the smell of kerosene, he stopped. There he waited as SCP-106 emerged from the darkness in front of him. It snarled and howled, spitting black bits of tar as its gnarled yellow teeth came close to the Plague Doctor's face. The Plague Doctor calmly turned and waded out of the half-filled room. SCP-106 tried to lunge at him to follow, but it could not. It found itself rooted in liquid, unable to easily open a portal in the space between the walls. Stepping out of the room, the Plague Doctor reached into his cloak and pulled out a large match from his leather bag. Without glancing back, he struck the match and gave a ginger toss into the flames, sliding the door closed behind him. The resulting explosion and subsequent inferno damaged the walls of the secondary containment facility and caused significant seismic activity within the outer walls of the containment site. Emergency lights flickered on and off in the darkness, and debris rained down from the ceiling in every direction. In this haze of rubble, the Plague Doctor picked himself up off the ground and began to dust his cloak clean with the one hand he had left. Satisfied, he took a content sigh and began to make for the exit to the outside world, where he would resume his quest to rid the Earth of the pestilence that had plagued mankind. Though an unexpected surprise made him pause. A flaming corpse began to emerge from a black hole in the wall beside him. SCP-106 intact and whole, the flames slowly seeping into his skin until they were all extinguished, and only smoke rose from his body. This time the Doctor was not so fast to react. The creature grabbed him by the face and slammed it into the nearby wall, cracking the marble surface. The black substance pooled around the Plague Doctor's face. SCP-106 opened a portal in the wall, pushing the Doctor's head into it. The events that followed afterwards are difficult to put together, as camera footage from the facility suffered severe damage due to SCP-049's explosion of the secondary containment chambers. SCP-106 was found back inside his cell in the containment cube, back to his dormant state, where he would remain again for the next few months. That is, until he would feel the need to hunt prey once again. As the doors of the 40-layer steel cube closed, the electromagnetic supports came back online, and the fluid chambers repaired and refilled. The committee is currently voting on whether or not to allow SCP-106's containment facility to be opened again. For now, the world could rest once more. Dr. Bannon could take a sigh of relief, but for how long, he thought. For that, there was no way to tell. Now go check out SCP-049 The Plague Doctor Captured and SCP-106 The Old Man Escape for more tales about your favorite anomalous entities from SCP Explained.